I think resistance, to add to what you're saying, it's a part of everything. There's some physics to it, but it's also part of growth. But the most fundamental way I think of resistance is resistance weight training, because in order to build a muscle, what does it have to have? It has to have resistance. And that's why you put weight on. So your body is resistant to that. And that's what builds the muscle, right? But it's actually not during that moment with the resistance. The muscle grows later. So there's a lot of and
you have to do it consistently over time, right? You have to face resistance consistently over time. I think the weight room is a great analogy. It's in almost everything we talk about. There's a sports analogy in there somewhere, and that's why I love talking sports. But I think that to kind of guide the conversation, we were talking about a few different things before we hit record, and kind of agreed that middle-aged men, and all of us for that matter, at different stages of life, because we're imperfect, among other things, we bump into these resistances, if you will. And you could probably name a few off the top of your head, but to me, it's centered around your ego, right? If you let things get involved with your ego, that resistance is going to push you back. It's going to succeed. But if you keep it about maybe the self, and you maintain a level of self-awareness, then you can really begin to understand this concept that resistance is a sign that you're pushing the right way, that you're growing, because growth creates resistance. So ironically, when you bump up against resistance, what you should be telling yourself is, I'm making progress. When in fact, most of the time we start playing around with self-doubt and imposter syndrome and stuff like that. And I don't think I've been on a group call or in a group meeting when this topic comes up of, what's challenging you, what's keeping you back. Everyone has the same issues. It's always the same issues.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I don't think we talk about it enough, but you mentioned that in mid-age, this maybe becomes more relevant, but I think resistance is a part of us from birth, especially childhood, teenage years, especially when you're growing, high school. Those are all resistance years. But the other thing I appreciate you mentioning is the ego, and how the ego gets in front of the growth, the natural growth process. Growing is resistance. That's when you're pushing through something that you're uncomfortable with, whether that's playing golf, right? Whether that's playing sports, little league baseball, or any sports. Even I use weight training as an example earlier, but when I played rugby and football, conditioning is a huge part of any sport, right? Mm-hmm. But what is it when you're running, not on the field, but just training, throughout the week in order to prepare for the games? That's what the coach is doing, or you're doing on your own. Is you're pushing yourself to the resistance where your body can't handle it anymore, and then the next day it becomes a little bit easier, and the next day it becomes a little bit easier. But that is resistance. It's pushing your body physically further than had you not brought it to that point. And then doing that consistently, you'll advance to where you can compete at a higher level. And without that conditioning, you're just not going to be able to compete at the highest level you want to. So,
well, I think, it's, as you well know, it's physical, it's emotional, it's mental, it's spiritual. I mean, I think one of the challenges of letting the ego in is one of them is impatience, because I think that, to your point about the weightlifting, and I use the sit-ups analogy, right? You're not going to get a six-pack by going to the gym once and doing 8 hours worth of sit-ups. Mm-hmm. You're going to do 20 minutes, 5 days a week, and then you're going to look in the mirror in 3 months. And if you look in the mirror before that, you're going to be disappointed, and you're going to feel a level of impatience, because that's human nature, right? We don't.
It's also resistance in your body. It's also the resistance not to eat potato chips and hamburgers, right? Mm-hmm. It's a combination of events that lead up to those results.
I think that the two most important pieces about this that we've already kind of mentioned are a recognition that this is good. This is a good sign. It feels bad, but it's good. And if we can get our subconscious and our conscious around that concept, and we can then add to that and the results are going to be delayed. Your gratification is going to be delayed. This is not almost nothing valuable that you can do for your long-term well-being is immediate. I can't think of anything that's immediate.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's prayer or meditation or breath work or exercise, all of that stuff, even correcting what you eat and changing your food lifestyle. These are all incremental, show up every day over time.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that you and I do on the podcast and when we just talk offline is we're always pushing the other into self-awareness. And we're both open to it. So it sometimes doesn't require much of a push. Sometimes it's just a reminder, right? Hey, yeah, and if I can, in a meeting earlier when I was discussing with some people this exact topic, I was asked, well, what do you think is your main resistance, Mark? And I said, I thought about this for a long time because I've been thinking about this stuff lately as I'm putting myself out there online and risking things and doing things that are new to me. Is I think it might be a fear of success as opposed to a fear of failure, because I think that when I think of, what I'm doing, I'm, reaching out to sell high-end, coaching courses and offerings to people to help them through significant decisions in their lives. And if I'm successful with this, there's probably going to be a book, which is publicity. There's probably going to be, I see a podium where I'm talking to a lot of people, which scares me, right? I'll be probably getting on a plane and flying around and meeting new people, which is, I'm good at that. But I honestly, it does scare me. It's like the expectations that will be out there of me as I rise in this position of authority are daunting.
Yeah. We've talked about this before, and I happen to disagree with that philosophy or belief that a fear of success. I believe fear of failure is a far more realistic fear than being successful. I mean, your fear of, I'm fearful of not manifesting itself, that not coming to fruition, that scared, that fears really that failure is more concerning than actually all these things happening as you want them. So, but I think with resistance comes failure, and you have to learn to be willing. You have to be willing to fail in order to evolve, to get better. And I think when we get older, it's more difficult because you're running out of time, and you don't get instant feedback. It's not like, you get recess and you get another shot at it. If you're in the 5th grade, the next recess after lunch, you get repped, you get opportunities to do it more. And I think as we get older, we're running out of time. We don't get as many opportunities, and that's fearful.
Well, I think that what I'm hearing from all this is that I think that these resistances are unique to individuals. And I think the other thing is, I think that, so you can be right and I can be right as well, because I'm talking about me, not you. You're talking about you, not me. And so, but the other thing,
I have a question, not to interrupt you, but I just want to appreciate your thought. You believe you could be fear of success.
I believe I could be.
Yeah. And what scares you more, to be successful or to fail trying?
I'd have to ask myself over an extended period of time and reflect on that a little bit. My immediate emotion when you ask me that question is, I'm not fearful of failure at all. I've failed miserably countless times in my life, and I've gotten back up every single time and have ended up succeeding in whatever capacity that meant. So I'm not viscerally at all. I'm not emotionally charged by the concept of failing at all. The concept of succeeding, and then the high level of expectations of me consistently performing it at that level, that feels a little scary to me.
And those expectations come from yourself or from others?
Probably from myself, but it feels like it comes from others. Like, why do I give a shit what anyone else thinks about me? Right? That's the ideal, right? Without being offensive. Why do I give a shit, especially a stranger? Like this woman who accosted me online that I told you about earlier. I'm like, I felt that in my soul. I got angry when she called me that. And
That's
I
a
can
form of
still,
resistance. That's a good thing. That challenging you, bringing that emotion to you is part of growth too.
exactly,
And,
exactly. But
and
I
maybe you
also
were
think,
fearing that would happen someday, and it did, and it's not as bad as you think it is. And now you're ready to take that on again, or maybe in a way that had that not happened, maybe you were fearful that would happen someday, and now it's happened, and now you can move on and excel in those areas. I think that,
I will say the few times when people get nasty with me online, it doesn't happen very often, because I don't, as you know, I don't take an illogical, irrational, dogmatic position on things. I try and ask questions. I try and speak logically, and I try not to. My intention is not to offend. I don't care if I offend, but it's not my intention. There's no malice in me. So I'm. But when people criticize me, at least for a moment, I take it personally, for
Mhm.
sure. You know. But the other thing I was going to say, Jim, about this whole, if there are 18 different types of resistance, I'm just picking a number out of the air. I think it's probable that we all go through all of them at some point. And based on the nature of the challenge we're dealing with and the experience and the skill that we bring to that challenge, might push us in the direction of, well, I feel like an imposter in this instance, but I know I'm not an imposter. But like, who the hell am I to be coaching these people who are equally as experienced, but not in what I am? You
Yeah,
know, so
yeah,
it's an interesting shuffle game of cups
yeah,
and
yeah.
balls. You know,
Yeah,
yeah.
I often like to use quotes because it reminds me of these conversations. But one of my favorite quotes on my wall in my gym is yeah, if you're not failing, you're not trying. And
Mm-hmm,
there is something to say for that, right? If you're not failing, then you're not trying hard enough.
mm-hmm.
And the other one I like that's related to this is don't wish it was easier, wish you were better.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's another one you remind yourself that, because back to resistance, resistance is your ego trying to talk you out of not doing it. It's trying
Mm-hmm,
to talk you out of trying to talk you into quitting so you don't push yourself.
mm-hmm,
And then I made a decision many years ago, and I paid the price, I could tell you that. But I'd rather die trying. It's a Robert Greene book. It's a
mm-hmm.
it, he, he wrote the 50th law. He's wrote a couple of them, but
I'm not
one of his
familiar with
things,
him. Not,
oh
not
yeah,
okay.
it's a well-known, but anyway, he did one about the rapper 50 Cent. And one of his quotes was, I'd rather die trying. And
Mhm.
that's how he took on life, because and in the end, I would rather, I could live with myself for trying, but I'd rather live defeated to some degree, or knowing I tried, than not trying. That was more fearful than not trying or
I
giving
think
up.
I think you kind of, the other thing I'm hearing is that it sounds like you kind of have to find your motivator. You know, people get motivated by different things, and it's just as, if I am in fact fearful of success, then and I will, because this thought really just recently dawned on me. I think it was some weeks ago where I started thinking, well, because maybe it was because your and I conversation, you were adamant about the fact that there's no such thing as fear of success, and I'm like, I'm going to think about that. I'm going to let that resonate and stew on that for a little bit. And then I thought back to previous successes and previous failures. I mean, I started my first company that I started on my own with one partner, and I funded it with him. There was no mentor in that scene. This was us starting from scratch. And I remember my daughters, as they've kind of moved into their own entrepreneurial journeys, have said to me, Dad, you were building $1 million house, and the company you work for just got sold, and Marky was in mommy's womb, and we were small. I mean, that's like the worst time ever to start a business. Weren't you scared? And I remember, and they've asked me that a couple of times. I remember saying, I don't recall being scared at all. I recall being ready, and I
How old
recall.
were you, Mark? Because I really think this has a lot to do with the different stages in our life. I mean, you can either do more, or you just don't know the consequences. You just do what's in front of you, especially with kids. And look how productive, say, a 35, 40-year-old mother is. The amount of things that they can do in one day, or
Oh, I know.
father, doesn't have to be a mother, but you're one of them. So a lot of this has to do with the period in your life.
Yeah, I was in my early 30s. It was 1996,
Yeah.
as I
You,
recall.
you also don't know what's on the line. As we get older, you realize the consequences. So I do think that is part of the unknown. You're
Well,
just,
yeah, no question. I mean, that's where the phrase "ignorance is bliss" comes in, right?
yeah,
So,
that's why young people are the co-founders of startups.
yeah,
Because if they really knew what was involved and they really knew their chances of success are the percentage of success is so low, no logical person would do that. But when you're in your 50s or 60s, you realize that this doesn't make sense. Why would I take that kind of risk? So part of it is just, experience, knowledge and wisdom.
well, it is, and it's just, when you experience success at a young age, excuse me, a reasonably young age, because you were able to jump in at least partially because of your ignorance of what it entailed, then you iterate and fail inside
Yes.
of that cocoon as it grows, and you eventually get to the other side of success, whatever that means for that organization and for you. Now you're equipped with that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the next time you go in, you don't have to be as ignorant. You don't need that ignorance because you have the experience to replace it. Right.
Yeah.
And we, it was fascinating. As I told you, listening to Elon Musk get interviewed, but he was talking about, they just valued Twitter again. It's worth half of what he paid for it. Right.
Yeah,
and so, and that bounced off him like rain off of fucking Rain-X windshield. His like 22 billion loss, at least on the books. And 80% of the people that worked there when he got there are now gone. He said, I got rid of most of them, but a lot of them left too.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and you can't listen to that and not say, was that all inefficiency? And he'll tell you, well, he said something like, well, when your business is not social activism, you can get rid of a lot of people.
Yeah.
I thought that was fascinating. But
Yeah.
back to resistance. I think that I'm going to play around with that, but I think you've said it before. We've talked about these people, not by name, but close friends, colleagues that have they maybe not given up in some areas, but given up in others. Maybe they gave up on their relationship. Maybe they gave up on one of their kids. Maybe they gave up on their career. Most of the people that I see in my age group that have given up on something have given up on their health.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But
And
I want to get back to ego, because I do think that the ego is the driver early on. Again, whether you're 10 years old, 20 years old, 30-year old, it's the ego that's driving that success.
Mm-hmm.
And that can haunt you too, because as you get older, if you're managing your ego, that's a monster that really could get the best of you and the people around you. So I do think that ego has to be factored into this conversation.
No question. And I think that you have examples of that in your life, among others, because of your contact with people that played sports at a professional level, at a high level, at a Hall of Fame level.
I have.
Because that switch gets turned off one day, and what happens? That ego that made you the leading tackler in the NFL, you got no place to put it now. You know,
or it doesn't work because your audience it doesn't know you from the past. It doesn't know what you did. You didn't make the big play. You're in a different role or position. And yeah, I did my as you know, I have my philanthropy, or something I feel strongly in as far as a cause is helping young men, particularly through their high school years, because that's such a foundation that you take on into life. And even though it's related to sports, in this case football, it has nothing to do with the sport itself. It really is it is a way to throw a net over a group of young men, where you can really shape their life by some of these disciplines and the camaraderie, and most importantly, being around strong male role models. So we did our fundraiser this past Friday. It was great. I'm particularly proud of this one because 15 years ago, when we started the alumni group, we did a couple golf tournaments, and that same class came back 15 years later. And now our head coaches, they're PE teachers, few of them have their master's degree, they're in education, and they've all come back. So this alumni group now is truly alumni. And it's kind of cool because to see the second generation. Going into it 15 years ago, I didn't necessarily know what I was getting into, but it did become more into, I was getting satisfaction more about the mentoring of the coaches as much as it was the players. And so they had, the new head coach was speaking to the audience after the golf tournament, and he asked me to say a few words. And I just, obviously I spoke a little about this, but I said, the world's very divided right now. And I like to believe that it starts with leadership, but it also starts with models. Modeling is like parenting, modeling about how these coaches act, how they see us. We had the superintendent, or not the superintendent, but the Hayward Unified School District board president was there, the principal was there, the athletic director was there. So if they see people getting along at the top, and we're having fun, and we're getting things done. And by the way, everybody's a different flavor, right? Everybody's different hair colors, different skin colors. That was not at all part of the conversation. And I really think that's the model for the rest of the country. We have all this division, we have all these different things, but to really make change, it starts in those early ages where they see people getting along, they see people getting things done. So I didn't mean to go off on a tangent. It's coming to me right now. And I think that, but where I was going about the ego was, when I got into it, I think it was my ego. It was the ego of, hey, look at me, I'm doing good. Or the ego of hanging out with my friends that, at the time were professional coaches in football and baseball. It's changed a lot. The mission is their success. I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. My ego is satisfied by seeing those young guys, and I don't have to be the guy in front anymore. They threw the tournament. So yeah, I think, but that took some time. That's a phase you get into in life, I think, as you get older. And I think that's our new role too. You don't have to be the guy to have an impact and have change.
Yeah, you gotta get your ego put to the side, I think, to be an effective leader of any kind, but particularly of young men. I think the ego is there's nothing. If you need your ego to accomplish something, then you're probably doing the wrong thing.
Absolutely. Well said, Mark.
I watched my my older brother, who he was a F-15 fighter pilot for many, many years. And I liken that to being a professional athlete without the celebrity, because it's an experience that you literally can't replicate anywhere else. Flying in an F-15 that can accelerate at multiple times the speed of sound going straight up, and I can't even fathom what that might feel like. But his ego was still around when he stopped. And for about a year, it caused him a lot of problems.
Yeah, not uncommon, right? That's the ego that, again, in order to achieve that, I mean, how many of those in the world? There's very few guys that even get to that point. It takes some ego. You would never not have an ego to put yourself, talk about resistance and failure to achieve that.
His ego drove his success until it stopped.
Yeah.
And
we refer to ego as bad. Ego is very important. It's very good.
He didn't stop succeeding. So I want to clarify that, but he figured out a way to transfer his energies. And part of that transfer of energy was putting his ego in his back pocket for a while, and because it's just like when you get to a certain age, when you're a guy, where it's like, okay, I want to kick the shit out of this motherfucker, but I'm a dad.
Yeah. Well, there's, the other word that we can inject in this conversation is appropriate is humility, because what comes with the ego comes some humility. Another quote I often refer to is there's many definitions of humility. If anybody ever wants to, it has nothing to do. You just Google humility and see all the different quotes that come back. But one of my favorite ones is, and it's not word for word, but in order to be human, you have to go through some humility. Like if you're not human unless you've experienced some humility, which is failure and self-reflection and embarrassment. That makes you human.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times we protect ourselves as humility is a bad thing. No, it's not bad at all. It makes you have more appreciation for others. It has, yeah, it's a beautiful word, and there's a lot to it. And I think it belongs with resistance and ego and even failure.
No question. Yeah, no, humility is it's kind of like, it feels like you might be being weak and you're exposing
Yeah.
yourself to frailty or flaws or misgivings or anything that's a little bit less than. But to your point, it's the exact opposite,
It
right?
really is.
It adds to your authenticity. It adds to your credibility,
It
right?
does.
And I think that, my kids tease me all the time. And I come from my dad was the dad. My mom was the mom. She stayed home and took care of everything. And my dad went out and made money. And he was in charge when he got to work. He was the captain of the flight. He was everybody on that plane in some capacity reported to him and had to do what he said, whether it made sense or not. That's a tremendous amount of responsibility.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because it was Father's Day a few days ago and
Yeah.
we didn't say anything about it. Right. Yeah. And I spent I was actually kind of a last minute thing, but I was at the LA Country Club for the US Open.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was very cool. My son flew in from Chicago. I drove down, and uh, a family member is part of the LA Country Club, so they got us access, and of course, all VIP. It was something else. Right next to the golfers as they were walking off the course, went into the locker room, the whole bit. It was quite an experience. But where I was going was when one of my son was he was probably 10, 12 years old. I took him. That's right. We were playing the national championships in Pennsylvania, and the three of the other guys on the team had sons all about the same age. So we all decided to take our sons to the national. This is the final national championship, right? It wasn't the lead up to it. It was the Final Four. But in rugby, you play Friday, you play Saturday and Sunday, and if you win Saturday, then you play for the championship on a Sunday. So I brought him and we lost, and I was the captain on the field. I was devastated, obviously, embarrassed and everything else. But you also realize, you fast forward 20 years later, and you realize maybe that was good for him to see his father fail, right? That
it's an interesting take on it. It's what's best for him is to see how his father handles the failure.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. And he's had his failures. He's doing quite well right now, and he's in a real good place. But I do think he got to see not just your father always doing well, but also your father maybe at his lowest moments at times. But like, I appreciate you saying that. I think it was much, how did he respond to it? Right. Now this was not my profession. So it wasn't like it was related to money, but it was still, it was the high at the time. It was Division I. It was the highest level.
I guarantee you that he knew how important it was to you. I guarantee you he knew that. Yeah. It's funny. It makes me think of some of the instances where I was reminded that my children were watching and listening.
Yeah.
And now they come back. I'm sure this happens to you as well. They'll come back at you with a posture or a line that they learned from you, and now they're using it against you.
Yeah.
And they know they're doing it, and they love it. It's really, no, man, look, I mean, we're both high achieving men with big egos and stubborn, intelligent, athletic. And, you have to be grateful for that. You have to be humble about that. It's just like, because most of the things that I just named, I may have taken good advantage of them, but I didn't go get them. They were given to me. God gave them to me. You know?
I agree. If it wasn't for ego, we wouldn't be doing this podcast right now. Of course we have an ego. let's be honest with ourselves about this. But
Yeah, I think to maybe kind of move towards a conclusion, and if something else pops with you, dude, please
yeah,
bring.
let me just throw this in before we wrap up, because
Yeah, yeah.
I think you may have heard me share this before. This was again years ago. This gal was my assistant. She was fantastic for years. Well, probably well over 10 years. But we were doing a big show down in LA. So we were driving from San Francisco to the LA Convention Center, and obviously she had worked with me for years, so I knew her, but it's different being in a car with somebody for 5 hours, right? And so we were driving down there, and I think I just finished the golf tournament. She saw these kids coming into our office that I would mentor them, or I'd have these different senior dinners and things. And she was just saying, "Hey, Jim, I really appreciate you watching over the years, help these kids. This is really good and this and that." And she says, I'll share something with you. She's like, I can't translate, because she spoke Japanese. That was her native language, but spoke perfectly good English. She was saying, in the Japanese culture, there's this saying. She goes, I can't again explain it in English exactly, but she said that fathers raise their children's with their backs, and she's pointing to her back. She's going like this. She said, I said, what do you mean? She goes, yeah, it's kind of a well-known thing that you raise your children with your back. And she says, what it means is it's not what you say to them, it's what they see you do. And so when you mention your daughters, talking about watching you build the house and watching you build a business and that, yeah, that's really how you raise your children. And then it was just amazing wisdom. The Japanese in general have amazing wisdom, but at that same time, one of my very, very good friends that I was playing rugby, he's from England, and he was an 8th grade school teacher, athletic director, very, very successful program. He kind of added to it. And I thought that was very, almost as important what she said. He goes, yeah, that means a lot. I deal with a lot of 8th graders, boys, so I could see their parents. And he says, well, it's not also what they see you do. It's how they see other people respond to what you do, because you don't see that.
No.
They do.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you said, it's like my son, when we did the national championship, we lost, by the way, in the final. So there's, when we win, we go the next day. But yeah, I think it was how he saw other people react to me, through the whole weekend, but also in that time.
Yeah.
So
No, I'm thinking about very recently, and I think I might have shared this with you already, is my son, because he's living with me now. So he's been hearing a lot more of what I've been doing, and he hadn't heard a lot of what I was doing for, a period of maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 years. But he had heard me do these same things from the time he was born until about 11 years old. And that's when the shit hit the fan with the divorce. And he stayed over there and got damaged, but has recovered nicely. And
it's pretty common, by the way.
Yeah. I tell people that are going through divorce with kids now, it's like, just keep in mind, your kids are freaking resilient, man. I tried to protect them, and I tried to save them, and you should, I suppose, but you kind of find out later that they got to save themselves. You just got to be you and hang in there. But anyway, he said, Dad, I think you thought for a while that I wasn't actually in the back seat there being quiet, listening to you. I heard everything you said.
Sure.
I saw everything you did. Yeah. And it was heartwarming, because it was a compliment, know? And so, I think that to conclude, I think that the message out there is just like, if you're pushing up against stuff and you're getting met with resistance and your ego is getting throttled, those are just signs of progress. Those are signs that you're moving in the right direction. And I know it's cliche on some level, but I think it's helpful to be reminded of that. I need to be reminded of it quite frequently, and I'm appreciative of when I am reminded. Sometimes I remind myself, and sometimes something or someone else reminds me. But I think those are positive signs.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned it. We forget to talk about our framework. Eventually, it's the imperfection is the perfection. That's the show. That's everything related to what we're talking about. But also remember, in our framework, in the middle is self. right?
Mhm.
It's self-evaluation, it's self reflection. It's all about that. And that's very relevant to the ego and to the resistance and all these different things. But yeah,
Yeah, I think that's the self-awareness in the middle of that circle of ours is it's where everything stems from.
yeah.
I mean,
And
that,
self-evaluation. So
Mhm.
it's one thing to be self-aware, then it takes some self-evaluation. Um, so then you can act on that and see how you're pushing that out into everything you do, whether it's your career, whether it's relationship with others, whether it's your health, physical, mental health, whether it's your career.
Well,
It all starts with ourself. Yeah.
yeah, you got self-awareness is maybe in the first of the few steps. Okay, I'm aware that something is awry or amiss or needs attention or whatever. Self-evaluation is, okay, what is it?
Mhm.
Exactly, what is it? And then self-execution is, okay, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So anyway, well,
Self
that was fun.
dignity, self. You can just go on and on.
On
It's
and on and
all
on.
it all starts with ourselves. So
But our time has come to conclude for today.
all right, we got a lot today. We got a little Father's Day stuff in there. We got the ego resistance. So it's good show, Mark.
Yeah, man. No, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I don't know if you want to talk for a few more minutes or you got to go. I'm good until 2:30. I got about 10 more minutes, but